fellow Toastmasters. David Rock's the founder of the Neuro Leadership Institute. He teaches leadership strategies, teaches at universities, lectures at universities, writes books, and is a relatively smart guy. Over a 4-year period, he interviewed 30 neuroscientists from around the world, and then he wrote a book called Your Brain at Work. Here's just one of the concepts that I got out of it. Thinking rationally is overrated, massively overrated. Normally when we're thinking, recalling information, holding it in our mind, we are using our prefrontal cortex, which is the region in front of our brain. This is the area where we do most of our active thinking, or rational thinking. It's interesting to note that this is the only region of the brain that's connected to every other part of the brain. No other part of the brain does that. It's also the only region of the brain that has a braking system. It can stop motor control, it can stop thinking, it can stop feeling. You can imagine with it. You can bring in new information, compare it with old information, hold it in your brain, produce an idea. You can take old information, you can compare it with other old information, hold it there, and come up with something completely new. When you drove here this evening, you probably didn't use your prefrontal cortex. You used deeper regions of your brain that you could use without actually thinking. You've been here before, you already know the way. You probably put little conscious effort into getting here. So I'd like to do an experiment. Everyone just call the answer out loud. What's 1 plus 1?
2.
No effort. You're not using your prefrontal cortex. You're not thinking. You already know the answer. What's 10 plus 10?
20.
No effort. No prefrontal cortex. What's 256 plus 178? A large amount. Do you feel that? You didn't really want to do it, right? So why don't you want to do it? Well, it takes some effort. But did you notice something else? There's some hesitation. It's like you really don't want to go there. You're not that comfortable. It's almost like a form of a subtle threat. So why is it a threat? Well, there's a good reason. We evolved at a time when metabolic resources were really limited. We evolved with famine, war, survival. We lived to 20 years of age on average. So we were rewarded for minimizing our mental resources. So there's a subtle hesitation in doing some work with the brain, and it's a threat response. It presents a challenge for us in today's society. The brain has a limited bucket of resources for activities like decision-making and impulse control. The prefrontal cortex actually uses a fair amount of glucose, and it depletes glucose very quickly. Studies show that when we solve a problem or make a decision, our blood glucose goes down, and our performance on the next activity goes down. This explains a number of life's experiences. First, we try to do things we already know how to do well, rather than doing something new. When we do something well, we immediately embed the pattern so we don't have to think about it. When we try to get someone else to change or do something differently or try something new, we're going to have to deal with this threat response. Here's something else. Just for example, if your prefrontal cortex can hold a square foot of information, then in comparison, the rest of your brain can hold the equivalent of the Milky Way. So there's a slight difference in capacity. And it's important to understand that this prefrontal cortex, this rational part of your brain, actually is a limited resource. But normally we go to work, we start our day by checking emails, we decide what to do with them, we respond to them, we delete them, we start scheduling meetings, we're burning lots of glucose. Then we try to spend the rest of our day solving problems, coming up with new ideas. But the brain becomes tired. And this rational way we go about approaching our day is wrong from the brain's perspective. If we truly respect that attention is a limited resource, what would we do differently? But here's the really big thing. Most problems are not solved rationally. In laboratory studies of the brain, actual scientific experiments, the prefrontal cortex not only isn't the source of the solution, it's actually the source of not finding the solution. So the prefrontal cortex stops us from solving problems a lot of the time. Lab studies show 60% of the problems that people solve, they can't explain. You're walking home from work, you're not really thinking of anything, then suddenly an idea pops into your head. Where did it come from? Why didn't it come to you while you're at your desk? You're watching TV, walking your dog, you wake up in the morning, suddenly the answer to a problem comes to you. Why now? Turns out the very thing we normally use to solve problems, this prefrontal cortex, does more to inhibit problem solving the more complex the problem. So to understand this, we need to understand how insight works. This will all come together. In order for insight to happen, we need to stop thinking. One of these scientists brought a Tibetan monk into his experiment, mapped out his brain, had him try to solve a problem. It wasn't working. So I asked him what strategy, what techniques he was using to solve the problem. He said he was focusing on the problem. So they suggested he stop focusing, stop thinking about the problem, and actually stop focusing on anything at all. Allow his mind to go blank. He became an insight machine. So why? The reason is, if we want to think of something new, we need to dampen down our current knowledge. We need to quieten down our brain. But we don't normally practice this type of cognitive control. We don't normally decide when it's time to stop thinking. But people who display strong cognitive controls actually have more insights. There's also a correlation between anxiety and happiness in insights. The more anxious we are, the more closed our field of view. The more happy we are, the more open our field of view. So companies that have ping pong tables and foosball tables and allow for generally goofing off have proven very useful for solving very complex problems. If we can shift from anxious to happy, we greatly increase the number of insights we have. So in summary, we overemphasize our rational resources. We only have the capacity for a few hours a day, and our rational resources are oftentimes not used for solving most problems. So I have two questions for you to think about. What does this explain you already do? And what does this suggest you might do differently? Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. It's a very interesting speech. Explains sometimes why I don't get my work done in the afternoon. So maybe I should ask my boss to put up a foosball table. Our next speech is by Carol Ann Mercer. Carol's been an active member at Toastmasters here for a while. She joined Toastmasters in April of this year. She's an office administrator with a locally owned Newfoundland firm. She's married with a 22-year-old son, and her hobbies include golfing, salmon fly fishing, and sewing. It's very eclectic. Today she will be giving her icebreaker speech, which is the first